He was just the janitor, a quiet, hardworking single father nobody paid attention to. But one shout from him, "Don't get in the car," would change everything inside the company. What happened next shocked the CEO, the staff, and the entire building. The building stood tall against the night sky, its glass windows glowing faintly under the hum of street lamps. Inside, the offices were silent now, desks empty, computers dark, the energy of the workday long gone. But one man still moved through the halls, his footsteps quiet, steady, purposeful. A janitor. His cart rolled softly along the tiled floor, filled with cleaning supplies, a mop, and a small radio that never played above a whisper. He had walked these corridors 100 times before, knowing every creak of the floor and every smudge on the wall. Yet, despite all those nights of work, he remained invisible to most of the people who spent their days here. They brushed past him during mornings, barely looking his way. Polite greetings often went unreturned. If he spoke, it was usually with a nod or a short word, nothing more. He was the man in the background, the one who made the space presentable for everyone else's success, but who received no recognition himself. Still, he carried himself with dignity. His shirt was always neatly tucked, his work done with quiet pride. No one saw it, but every surface he wiped, every floor he polished, he did with precision. He wasn't just cleaning, he was caring for the place, holding it together in ways the executives above never noticed. His life outside these walls was far more demanding than anyone would guess. At home, a small apartment waited for him, cluttered not with luxury, but with love. A child's drawings were taped across the fridge, colorful reminders of the one person who truly saw him. Every evening, no matter how tired he was, he found time to help with homework, to cook dinner, to listen. Being a single father wasn't easy, but it gave him purpose. He measured his wealth not in dollars or titles, but in the smile of his child when he walked through the door. And yet, beneath the quiet exterior, there was something sharper about him, an awareness most people lacked. His eyes scanned rooms, naturally, catching the details others overlooked. A door left slightly ajar when it should have been locked. A man in a suit who didn't belong on the floor he claimed to be visiting. The hum of a machine left running when it should have been. Silent. It was instinct, the kind that couldn't be taught. He noticed things, and though he never spoke of it, those instincts had kept him alive long before he ever picked up a mop. Tonight was no different. As he emptied wastebaskets and wiped down desks, his mind picked up patterns. He noticed how one of the side doors had been propped open slightly, a draft moving through the hallway. He closed it firmly, making a mental note. He saw a delivery box sitting in the corner without a label, unusual, though not alarming. He pushed his cart past quietly, but his mind filed it away. Down the hall, he overheard muffled voices drifting from the executive lounge. A group of managers still lingered, their words sharp with excitement and pride. They spoke of bonuses, promotions, the next big deal that would boost their careers. They clinked glasses of wine, their laughter echoing, faintly. None of them gave a thought to the man quietly scrubbing the floors beneath their polished shoes. He was part of the background, like the walls, the lights, the furniture. Something to be used, not acknowledged. But as he worked, a subtle unease gnawed at him. In recent weeks he had noticed something odd about the company parking lot. Cars. Pulling in late at night, engines idling too long before shutting off. Unfamiliar vehicles parked in corners, drivers lingering inside as if waiting. It wasn't constant, but often enough that it planted a seed of suspicion in his mind. Tonight, as he wheeled his cart toward the lobby, he glanced out through the glass doors. There it was again. A sleek luxury car sat beneath the dim lights, its engine running low, exhaust misting faintly in the cold air. It wasn't one of the usual company vehicles, nor did it match any of the executives' cars he had seen parked before. He slowed his steps, watching. The tinted windows concealed whoever sat inside, though faint movement flickered within. His instincts sharpened, every sense on edge. Something about the way the car sat there, too still, too quiet, yet too deliberate, didn't feel right. For a moment, he considered walking closer, taking a better look. But then he shook his head. It wasn't his business. His job was inside, not outside. Whoever was in that car, it wasn't for him to worry about. He pushed the thought aside, gripping the handle of his cart as he turned back to the hallway. The mop bucket sloshed softly as he moved, fading into the background once again. Still, the image of that car lingered in his mind. A luxury vehicle sitting just a little too long in the shadows of the lot. He told himself it was nothing. Just another night. Just another car. He didn't know it yet, but that small detail, the one he almost ignored, would soon shatter everything. The next day, the building buzzed with energy, its glass walls gleaming, in the afternoon sun as if nothing unusual had ever lingered in its shadows. Inside, the atmosphere was thick with chatter. Papers shuffled, and phones buzzed, but all of it was overshadowed by the meeting that had just ended. Executives streamed through the lobby in neat lines, their conversations filled with speculation about mergers, promotions, and the bonuses that might soon follow. Smiles stretched across eager faces, laughter rose in short bursts, and voices carried with the kind of admiration reserved only for one man. At the center of it all, the CEO emerged, shoulders squared, posture commanding, a figure who carried the weight of success effortlessly. Employees slowed their steps just to catch a glimpse of him, their words softening into whispers of respect and envy. And outside the large revolving doors, waiting faithfully at the curb, stood a sleek black car, polished so perfectly that it reflected the very sky above it. Its engine purred with quiet confidence, the kind of vehicle that spoke of wealth and power without a word. The crowd of staff funneled toward the courtyard, some lingering deliberately, pretending to check their phones while sneaking glances at the leader they admired. For them, watching him leave was another reminder of what they aspired to: control, influence, the kind of authority that made the entire world pause. The CEO walked with steady strides toward the car, his briefcase in hand, his expression unreadable but confident, as though nothing in this world could ever touch him. Unnoticed among the sea of suits and polished shoes, a man in plain work clothes pushed a cleaning cart across the marble floor. His movements were slow, steady, as though time passed differently for him. He had no reason to hurry, no promotions waiting, no bonuses promised. He was simply part of the building's rhythm, a quiet presence that blended into the backdrop of glass and steel. Yet, as he reached the doors and stepped out into the courtyard, his eyes fell on the car, and instantly something inside him tensed. He had seen this car before, perhaps not the exact one, but the type, the posture, the way. It sat in the lot too still, too staged. His gaze shifted to the driver. A cap pulled low, jaw tight, hands stiff on the wheel. That wasn't one of the company's drivers. The man's eyes darted quickly as if measuring distances, calculating something he didn't want noticed. The janitor's breath slowed, his instincts sharpening. He had spent years ignoring the gossip of executives, but he had never ignored the quiet alarms inside him, the voice that whispered when something didn't belong. The CEO was only a few steps away now. The staff held their breath in admiration as he approached the car, waiting for the smooth transition into luxury and power. The janitor's eyes flickered again, and that's when he saw it. Faint but undeniable, the glint of wires under the dash, the subtle, frantic movement of the driver's hand near a device. In a rush of clarity, the truth struck him like a hammer. This wasn't a driver waiting to open a door. This was a trap. Without another second's thought, his voice tore. From his chest, raw and powerful, echoing across the polished courtyard. "Don't get in the car!" The words cracked through the air like thunder, cutting across every conversation, silencing the laughter and the whispers in an instant. Heads whipped around, eyes widened. For a moment, no one moved. The janitor stood rooted to the ground, his chest heaving, his face etched with urgency that couldn't be faked. The crowd blinked in disbelief, unable to comprehend what they had just heard. A ripple of shock ran through the employees. A man near the front scoffed and muttered, "What does he think he's doing?" Another laughed nervously, whispering, "He's lost his mind, yelling at the CEO like that." A few smirked, their eyes filled with contempt, because to them he was still just the janitor, an invisible man who had overstepped in the most ridiculous way. But the CEO stopped. One foot hovered inches from the curb, his eyes narrowing as he turned toward the outburst. His expression was unreadable, but something in the tone of that voice clawed at him. It wasn't disrespect. It wasn't madness. It was desperation. His gaze flicked from the janitor to the car, and in that instant the world seemed to slow. Then, with a small step backward, the CEO hesitated, and in that heartbeat, everything changed. A deafening blast ripped through the courtyard. Fire erupted in a sudden storm of heat and fury as the black car exploded outward in a ball of flame. The shockwave thundered across the ground, shattering windows in the lobby, sending glass raining down in sharp, glittering shards. The roar of the blast drowned every scream, a violent force that tossed people off their feet and turned the polished courtyard into a battlefield of smoke and chaos. Papers swirled in the air like frantic wings, debris scattered in every direction, the acrid stench of burning fuel choking the breath from every throat. The CEO staggered back, his briefcase slipping from his hand, his face pale, dust clinging to his suit. He stood frozen, staring at the inferno where his car had once been, his mind reeling at how close he had come to stepping into death itself. Employees screamed, some dropping to the ground, others stumbling blindly for cover. Alarms blared overhead, piercing through the haze of smoke, and the sprinkler systems inside the building activated, streams of water hissing against shattered glass and curling flames. Panic rippled through the courtyard as voices rose in terror, people calling out for help, clutching one another in fear. But through the chaos, one truth became clear to every pair of eyes that turned, slowly, toward the man who had shouted. The janitor, still standing with his chest heaving, had not moved an inch since his warning. His face was grim, his eyes unwavering, the gravity of what had just unfolded settling in the silence between heartbeats. He had seen the danger. He had stopped the CEO from stepping into the car. Whispers spread, breaking through the smoke-filled air. He saved him. He knew. He just saved the CEO's life. The same voices that had sneered moments before now trembled with awe, disbelief, and something dangerously close to respect. The CEO turned, his eyes locking onto the man who had just changed everything. For the first time, there was no invisibility surrounding him. No one saw a janitor. Now, they saw the reason their leader was still alive. They saw the man who had been overlooked, underestimated, ignored, yet had saved them all from catastrophe with a single shout. And as the sirens grew louder in the distance, as flames crackled and the courtyard filled with chaos, the silence between them spoke louder than words. The man who had been invisible was invisible no longer. Flashing red lights painted the courtyard in frantic color as emergency responders swarmed the scene, their radios crackling, boots pounding against the pavement. Firefighters battled the smoking wreckage of the black car, hissing water spraying across twisted metal that glowed faintly with heat. Police cordoned off the area with yellow tape, shouting for order as panicked employees clustered in small groups, their voices trembling with confusion and fear. Inside the building, alarms shrieked and security ordered a full lockdown, sealing exits, pulling down metal barriers, and checking identification with sudden urgency. The once pristine tower, a symbol of wealth and power, now felt like a fortress. Under siege, its glass walls scarred with cracks from the force of the explosion. Investigators moved swiftly, crouching near the burned skeleton of the vehicle, pulling twisted wires and charred components from the debris. Their murmurs carried grim certainty. The blast had not been accidental. It was a carefully planted car bomb, designed with precision, to detonate the moment the CEO entered. The evidence was undeniable. Someone had meant to kill him. The news spread through the gathered employees like wildfire, each whisper passing quicker than the last. People gasped, hands covering mouths, eyes darting toward the CEO with renewed awe. Yet louder than the shock of the attack was a single question whispered over and over again. How had the janitor known? He stood quietly off to the side, his hands resting loosely at his sides, his cart abandoned near the lobby. The same people who once passed him without a glance now surrounded him, pressing forward with trembling voices. "How did you see it?" one asked. "Did someone tell you?" another demanded. "Were you involved somehow?" Suspicion mixed with gratitude, the chaos of human instinct searching for answers. The man did not flinch under their gaze. He only shook his head, his voice low and steady. "I just saw something off," he said. "That's all." His humility silenced some, though not all. A murmur of disbelief lingered. Surely there had to be more. The CEO pushed through the crowd, dust still clinging to his suit, his face pale but steady. He stopped in front of the janitor, eyes fixed on him, not with superiority this time, but with something far heavier. Gratitude. His voice, usually clipped and formal, softened. "You saved my life," he said simply. The janitor looked at him, his expression calm, almost detached. "I just reacted," he replied. "Anyone would have done the same." The CEO studied him, sensing the weight behind those words. No, anyone would not have done the same. He knew it. Everyone here knew it. Hours later, after the smoke cleared and the building settled into uneasy quiet, the CEO found him again, this time in a private corner of the nearly empty tower. The chaos had lessened, employees sent home, investigators still working the site. The CEO asked him to sit, a request that would have shocked every executive in the company had they witnessed it. At first, the janitor resisted, his instinct to stay in the background unshakable, but at last he obliged, folding his hands and sitting with quiet composure. The conversation began with simple questions. How did you notice the wires? Why were you looking so closely? And then, slowly, the answers began to spill truths hidden behind years of silence. The janitor's eyes dropped for a moment as he admitted he hadn't always been who he was now. Once, years ago, he had lived another life, one built on discipline, skill, and danger. Military, perhaps law enforcement, perhaps something even more shadowed, the specifics left unspoken. He had been trained to observe the smallest details, to react before others even registered the threat. That training had saved his life more times than he could count, but it had come at a cost. A personal tragedy had cut his world apart, forcing him to step away from it all. He left behind rank, recognition, and camaraderie to raise his child alone, to give them a life of safety, far from violence. The CEO listened in silence, struck by the depth of the man before him. Here was someone who had walked through fire long before tonight, someone who carried burdens far greater than cleaning floors or emptying bins. And yet, he had chosen humility. He had chosen a life of quiet dignity, content to be invisible if it meant his child would grow in peace. The CEO felt a heaviness stir in his chest. This man had saved him without hesitation, without thought of reward or recognition, because instinct and integrity demanded it. True character, he realized, did not shout for attention. It acted quietly, and it acted decisively. But the story did not end there. As investigators pressed deeper, questions grew darker. Was this bomb the work of external enemies, angry rivals from competing corporations? Or was the danger closer, perhaps inside the company itself, planted by hands that smiled during the day and schemed at night? Executives whispered among themselves, paranoia spreading quickly. Deals had been made recently, some controversial, some dangerous. A betrayal was not impossible. Suspicion lingered like smoke in the air, choking trust. Though he resisted at first, the janitor was eventually pulled into the heart of the investigation, not because of rank, not because of title, but because his eyes caught what others missed. While trained security fumbled over technical jargon, he spotted a scorch mark on the pavement that revealed where the device had been placed. He noticed the faint residue of oil suggesting the car had been parked and moved several times before the explosion. He identified the way the driver's cap had been pulled unnaturally low, the detail overlooked by those who passed him earlier. His observations painted a clearer picture than half the team of professionals. Reluctantly, he became indispensable. The employees watched from a distance, their perception of him shifting with every passing hour. Where once they saw only a man with a mop, now they saw someone with a depth they had never imagined. Whispers no longer carried contempt but quiet respect, tinged with shame that they had ignored him for so long. The CEO, too, watched closely, his mind heavy with the realization that the survival of his company and his own life had been safeguarded not by the security detail he paid fortunes for, but by the quiet janitor who noticed the things no one else dared to see. And so the night dragged on, filled with smoke, suspicion, and questions that refused to rest. The company had been shaken to its core, the building scarred not just by fire but by the truth that power and wealth had almost been destroyed by one overlooked detail. Yet, in the midst of the ruin, one truth glowed brighter than fire. The man who had been invisible was now the center of it all, not by choice but because courage had demanded it. And though he stood uneasy in the light of sudden attention, his sharp eyes and quiet voice guided those who searched for answers, reminding everyone around him that real strength often came from the places they least expected. A week had passed since the blast, but the memory of that day lingered in every corner of the company like a shadow that refused to leave. The courtyard, once a place of casual gatherings and brief goodbyes, had been scarred by fire and shattered glass. Workers who once hurried past the janitor without a glance now walked more slowly, as if the weight of what had happened reminded them that life could shift in a single instant. That morning, sunlight fell across the rebuilt pavement, clean and polished, but everyone still remembered the flames that had consumed the black car. When the CEO called for a company-wide gathering, rumors spread quickly. People whispered in elevators, by water coolers, in meeting rooms. They knew what it had to be about, but they wanted to hear it with their own ears. At noon, sharp employees crowded into the courtyard, the same place where they had once sneered when a janitor shouted at their leader. Now, silence fell when the CEO stepped onto a raised platform. His suit was immaculate as always, but his eyes carried something different. A gravity that came not from business charts or financial deals, but from having stood a breath away from death. He began to speak, his voice steady but charged with emotion. He told the story plainly, with no embellishments, recalling the instant a man most of them ignored had changed everything. He spoke of the shout that had stopped him from stepping into the car, of the hesitation that saved his life, of the explosion that could have taken not just him, but dozens of others nearby. The courtyard was utterly still. Many employees lowered their eyes, ashamed as memories surfaced. How often they had brushed past the janitor without thanks. How many times they had spoken around him as though he wasn't there. How some had even mocked him for being just the cleaner. Then the CEO did something no one expected. He stepped aside and called for the man to join him. A ripple of murmurs passed through the crowd as the janitor walked forward, dressed in his simple uniform, his expression modest, almost uncomfortable under the sudden attention. The people who had never seen him before truly looked at him for the first time. He was no longer invisible. Applause broke out, tentative at first, then growing until the courtyard rang with it. Some clapped with tears in their eyes, realizing that their lives might have been saved too, that their children and families might have lost them if not for this man who had shouted when no one else noticed the danger. The CEO raised a hand and waited for silence. Then, with a voice that carried through the gathering, he made an announcement that shook the company to its core. He would not allow this man to fade back into the shadows. He declared that the janitor would be offered a new role in the company's security division, not as a token gesture, but as recognition of his proven instincts, bravery, and dedication. Along with the role came benefits, stability, and a future for his child. The CEO looked at him directly and said that a man who could save lives so selflessly deserved not only respect, but opportunity. For a moment, the courtyard erupted again, this time with cheers rather than just applause. People who had once whispered behind his back now shouted his name with admiration. Some were genuinely moved, tears streaking down their faces as they clapped until their hands stung. Others hung their heads, guilt heavy in their hearts for the way they had dismissed him before. But the man himself stood still, humble as ever. He accepted the offer, not with pride or triumph, but with quiet dignity. His words were simple. He said he would take the position, not for recognition, not for praise, but to build a better future for his child, to make sure his son or daughter would never have to struggle the way he had. That evening, when the crowd dispersed and the building returned to its usual hum, the man went home. The weight of the day was still on his shoulders, yet his heart felt lighter than it had in years. He unlocked the small door to his modest apartment, and before he could set down his bag, the sound of quick footsteps filled the hall. His child rushed forward, arms flung wide, eyes shining with love. He dropped to one knee, pulling the child into his embrace, holding on tightly as if anchoring himself to the only thing that truly mattered in the world. In that quiet, tender moment, he whispered softly into the small ear pressed against his chest, "Everything I do is for you." The world outside might have seen him as a hero, a savior, a man who had saved the most powerful figure in the company. But inside his heart, he was just a father, doing what needed to be done for the sake of the life he had promised to protect. As he held his child, the noise of the company, the applause of the crowd, the praise of the CEO, all of it faded into the background. What remained was the unshakable bond between a father and his child, the quiet truth that had carried him through hardship, through invisibility, and through the fire of that terrible day. The story closed not with riches, nor with fame, but with a reflection as timeless as it was true. Sometimes the greatest heroes are not the ones wearing suits or standing at podiums. They are not the ones whose names fill headlines or whose faces appear on magazine covers. Sometimes the greatest heroes are the ones we overlook, the ones pushing a cart down an empty hallway, the ones who live in silence but carry within them strength that no one sees until the moment arrives. All it takes is one moment of courage to change everything. And in that moment, the invisible man became unforgettable.